Hello film fans and welcome to this episode of the Sherlockian. So, I realised the other day that I don't review American documentaries, well, at all. And I thought, well, what with my audience mostly being from America, it was probably only fair that I had a look at American documentary once in a while. So you're probably thinking, great, so what did you choose? Did you choose, National Geographic? Did you choose Nova? And the answer is no. I decided to choose Monsters Resurrected. Now, before you think, well, that's a really strange choice and switch off, there is some method to my madness. I was having a conversation in my comment section not so long ago with a fairly frequent commenter, BK Yong, and I hope I pronounced that right, by the way. And Yong was saying that we were having a completely different conversation about Carcharodontosaurus, and Young happened to mention Monsters Resurrected rather disparagingly, and that's kind of triggered a few kind of thoughts in my brain. I thought, oh yeah, I vaguely remember that name. Where have I heard that before? So I looked them up. And I realised I had seen clips of the show before, but never watched it really properly. And I decided to give it a go, just because I thought it'd be a bit of a laugh. And it's certainly interesting. I think it's fair to say. Now, first of all, I don't like to be too negative in these reviews, but this is one of the, should we say, less factual documentaries that I've reviewed. Basically, if you've not seen it, the premise of the program is that they look at a particular type of, prehistoric monster, and then they use, CGI and science and paleontologists talking to discover what made this predator so dangerous and exciting, and ultimately why it went extinct despite being all those things. Now, I think it's fair to say that the Discovery Channel weren't aiming at a particularly intellectual audience. It's a documentary that's supposed to be informative, but ultimately quite fun, and it's certainly that. I'll give them credit. And the other thing I'll give them credit for is that they actually chose some quite interesting range of prehistoric animals. So, for instance, they don't choose very your kind of, shall we say, mainstream prehistoric animals. So, for example, they don't choose T-Rex or Velociraptors. They choose things like terror birds or bear dogs or Spinosaurus or mosasaurs. Stuff which, I imagine most of you have probably heard of, but maybe didn't know a lot about, or I imagine that some mainstream audience members have probably never heard of at all. Bear dogs in particular are quite niche. So I will give them plaudits for doing that. Having said that, though, what makes this show so wonderfully, I think, comic and entertaining if you watch it in a kind of, should we say, tongue-in-cheek kind of way, is just the way it just goes through the motions. The first thing I love about this show is that clearly they were on a tight budget in terms of CGI. So the CGI is not bad, actually. It's not, photorealistic by any stretch of the imagination, but for the time, it's actually quite good. Certainly you can tell what each animal they're showing is supposed to be, and it's animated pretty nicely. What's really funny about it is they clearly had, as I said, a limited budget, so they reuse CGI a lot. So you tend to see the same scene about, I don't know, 3 or 4 times in the entire episode. The other thing I enjoy about it as well is, to save money, they often mirror image the same thing, so you'll say exactly the same sequence but from a different not occasionally a different angle, but mostly just the opposite direction. And I can't imagine that anybody was ever fooled by this. You can't think, oh yes, that's exactly the same scene I've seen of a bear dog jumping on top of a prey animal. It's just from the other way around. I'm sure it didn't fool anyone. But once you get into I imagine there are 2 types of people that watch this show. People that find that instantly annoying, and people like me that see that and just find it really entertaining. Because once you see it, it's very difficult to unsee it again. Virtually impossible, in fact. So I ended up quite looking for stuff. And it's quite good fun just to watch these kind of things while you're doing something else, like, washing up, or, I don't know, brushing your teeth. I wouldn't say I would sit down and watch it, but it's quite entertaining. However, it has to be said that it's quite a lot of inaccuracies in the show. Which for a documentary is not brilliant, is it? Particularly one that has actually had so many kind of talking heads, the experts they get on to chat. And I did wonder, I sort of thought, why are they just given a script? Or, did they just kind of, edit out lots of bits? Because I can't imagine that all these paleontologists are idiots. They probably know far more about the subject than I do. So I did kind of wonder, how they managed to end up with so many inaccuracies. Now, some of this is probably to do with just when this was filmed. For example, one of the paleontologists talking about saber-toothed cats, Smilodon. Um, and she mentions that when they kill their prey, they basically they use their saber teeth and they come in and they bite down on the neck of the animal and then they rip out a chunk of flesh and that kills it instantly. Now, I do remember hearing about this in kind of older documentaries and older books I've read, but I think the general consensus, and I might be entirely wrong about this, so feel free to comment below if I am, but I got the impression that the general consensus nowadays is the fact that basically the saber teeth of the animal kind of cuts into the windpipe, and basically they are positioned in so kind of way that basically that means that one bite is enough to basically cause maximum damage, and that they only use them, they don't use them to rip out chunks of flesh because they're actually quite delicate. What they do is they make sure they're holding the prey down and then deliver the fatal bite right at the end once they've got the prey secured. The other thing is, of course, they're not, I mean, I know they're called saber teeth, but they're only sharp at one end, aren't they? So I can't imagine you could actually really slash with them. You can only really stab. They're kind of more like, kind of, I suppose, a pickaxe rather than actually a saber in terms of, a weapon, if you wanted to compare them to. But that aside, there are other more, shall we say, egregious mistakes. Now, I think some of these were just down to the animation company that probably did the animation. I don't think you can really blame the experts, obviously. And to be fair, I mean, the producers maybe should have seen it, but if they're on a limited budget, maybe there wasn't enough money to redo certain animation sequences. And for example, the Spinosaurus, there's one bit in it. I did quite a bit of research on this show because there's quite a lot of people that enjoy pointing out inaccuracies in shows generally, and this one is full of them. So there's quite a few websites you can just see all of them listed. And one person pointed out, which I particularly enjoyed, the Spinosaurus is seen killing a type of sauropod. I forget which one. But basically, they pointed out that if that was an adult sauropod, as it seems to be in the animation, then the Spinosaurus is about 300 feet tall, about the size of Godzilla. Now, personally, I would, like to see a Spinosaurus that big. I think it would be quite entertaining. But it has to be said in terms of a documentary, is not entirely realistic. Now, you could argue that maybe that was supposed to be, just a smaller type of sauropod and they animated it a bit wrong, or simply it was supposed to be like a juvenile one. But, it is still kind of, quite a basic thing to get wrong, the size of the animal. It has to be said as well, generally speaking, the Spinosaurus bit in the documentary is a bit weird, it has to be said. I mean, they kind of transform into kind of this killer dinosaur, with big long claws, it goes around, slashing its prey and, and fighting other dinosaurs. Yeah, and ripping and portrayed. It's a bit. Imagine kind of an entire documentary on the Spinosaurus from Jurassic Park 3, and you'd pretty much there, really. It's exactly the same kind of view of it as this big, massive killer dinosaur. Now, personally speaking, I preferred the way they sort of looked at Spinosaurus in what's it called? Planet Dinosaur. Which I've already reviewed. It's one of my most successful videos, and to be honest, that scene in particular is really good. It shows it actually is quite a kind of, I don't want to say gentle, but a very specific kind of hunter, and one that hunts fish and is very comfortable around water and is far less comfortable away from water. And in fact, actually is, one scene I particularly liked in that bit is when it starts eating its kill and then it just leaves it when a much smaller crocodile sort of sneaks towards it. It's not even as big as the Sarcosuchus they show it fighting in this show. It's just like an ordinary crocodile. But I quite like that because it shows it's kind of a very specific predator that, while it is perfectly capable of fighting something the size of a crocodile, is not particularly keen on doing it. It would just prefer to hunt again. It's far less effort, and again, it shows it as a very kind of specialized predator rather than this big killer dinosaur that runs around and chopping other dinosaurs in half with its massive teeth and slashing them open with its big, huge claws. Now, there are bits in this I do actually quite enjoy, this show. I like the bits where they try and show you, using technology, how they would have hunted. So there's a great bit in the terror bird one, where they have basically create like a terror bird head out of like hydraulics and show it, crushing different stuff. There's a great bit where it crushes the head, and crushes a melon first of all, and then they have it crush a cow skull, and that bit's very enjoyable. I must say, they didn't really go into a lot of detail how they calculated how much force a terror bird would actually be capable of doing. They kind of vaguely talk about, measuring its neck muscles, or at least, the holes in the skull where the neck muscles would be. But they are very vague, it has to be said. And I did think, actually, well, that's made of metal, isn't it? And I know that obviously the keratin, I think it's keratin, that birds' beaks are kind of made out of, is very hard, certainly. But it's not like metal hard. It's just, harder than, say, bone or flesh. So I must admit, I was a little bit, shall we say, quite cynical as to how much damage a real terror bird's head would actually have done. But bearing in mind it's not made of metal, and you can't be certain exactly how much force it would be able to force down on its quarry. I can't imagine that actually when a real terror bird hit the skull of one of its victims, for want of a better word, its skull entirely shattered. But I might be entirely wrong. But even if they are valid, it's still quite fun, and I enjoyed. It gives you an idea certainly of how powerful a real terror bird would have been. So overall, yeah, I thought it's not a good documentary by any stretch of the imagination. There are far better ones to watch, even on this similar thing. There's a great documentary series by Bill Oddie when he looked at, I think it's called The Truth About Killer Dinosaurs, and they do similar things on that. But there's far more attention to detail, it has to be said, and I trusted him far more than I did the people that made this. But having said that, it is very enjoyable, and I would definitely recommend that you check it out, if only for a good laugh. So yeah, that was the Sherlockian. Thanks very much for watching. Stay tuned for more reviews of documentaries. You can also follow me on Twitter if you want to. The link is in the description below, as is the link to my review of Planet Dinosaur, if you want to check that out as well. But anyway, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Goodbye.